日本時間1月21日、2023年に38本塁打を放ち当時エンゼルスの大谷翔平選手とホームラン王の座を懸け争っていたホワイトソックスの主砲、ルイス・ロバート・ジュニア選手がトレードでメッツに移籍することが複数の米メディアによって報じられた。このトレードでホワイトソックスはルイス・アンヘル・アクーニャ選手、トルーマン・ポーリー投手の若手有望株2選手を獲得する。ロバート・ジュニア選手は23年以降故障もあり、思うような成績を残せていないものの、昨年はキャリアハイとなる33盗塁をマークするなど身体能力の高さは健在で、メディアは7番センターとしてラインナップに名を連ねると予想を展開。メッツの補強ポイントにも合致しており、実に8割のファンがこのトレードを支持している。エドウィン・ディアス投手やピート・アロンソ選手といった主力選手の流出から一転、ビシェット選手やロバート・ジュニア選手の獲得でメッツメディアやファンの反応も大きく変化しており、ここからその様子を字幕付きでお届けしていく。
Breaking news, breaking news, breaking goddamn news. So much so, I'm face camming this bitch. Luis Robert Jr. has been traded to the New York Metropolitans. The tweet from Jeff Passan goes as follows. Let me make sure I have it correctly. John Heyman tweeted, Luis Robert Jr. acquired by Mets in trade. Breaking news from Jeff Passan's tweet. The New York Mets in agreement on a trade to acquire center fielder Luis Robert Jr. from the Chicago White Sox. Sources tell ESPN. The White Sox will receive 2 young players from the Mets. And the full trade details, per ESPN sources from Jeff Passan again, the Mets will receive center fielder Luis Robert Jr. The White Sox will receive infielder Luis Angel Acuna and pitcher Truman Pauly. Holy shit, we got Luis Robert Jr. Holy fucking shit. We got him. Now, I said it. I've been saying it. And I said it even when we got Bo Bichette. I said it even when we got Marcus Semien. Somebody's got to go. Out of the 4 guys, Acuna, Mauricio, Beatty, Vientos, there's no infield spots left for at least a couple of those guys. And if you want to compete and bring in star players, you got to trade one of them. But to only trade Acuna and a pitcher for Robert? Holy shit, that's big. That is huge. Great trade by the Mets. It sucks that Acuna wasn't able to really truly develop as a Met. They were using him more as a gunner, as a backup infielder and stuff. They never really tried to use him as an everyday guy. The only time he competed and started every other day was when Francisco Lindor went down in 2024 due to that foot injury, or to that back injury, I remember. And even he didn't start all the time because Iglesias was there. They never really tried to make him into a big-time starter, but it was very obvious they trust Mauricio more. They want to use Beatty as a big utility guy, and they love Vientos' bat, and they trust that he'll bounce back. But again, breaking news, the Mets get Luis Robert, Acuna, and a pitcher will be going to Chicago. Big trade for the Mets. What does this mean for Bellinger? We shall see. More good news, though. Love it.
I really like this move for the Mets. There's obviously some gamble here, but if you have the money, and obviously Steve Cohen has the money, I think this is a worthwhile gamble in a market where it's difficult to find a center fielder. On the downside, with Robert Jr., you're dealing with lots of strikeouts and a little bit of an injury history these last few years. But even at his worst last year, he really hit lefty pitching. And suddenly with Bichette and Robert Jr., they have 2 right-hand bats to hit lefty pitching and balance out their lineup more, which I think is important. Even at his worst, Robert Jr. is a above-average center fielder. Again, a very hard thing to find. He'll hit some homers and he'll steal bases at a pretty good rate. So there is an upside to the player, and then there's the real upside. 3 years ago, he was one of the better all-around players in baseball. Is that gone completely? He should be in his prime at 27, 28 years of age, with a chance to do this in a lineup where he'll probably be asked to hit down some and not be asked to be a carrying force like he was with a bad White Sox team these last few years.
I love it for multiple reasons. Number one, the Mets finally have a legitimate, at least defensive center fielder, a proven big leaguer. Now, he strikes out a ton. Offensive numbers are not what you want. A few years ago, he had 38 homers. That's not the normal. Forget about that. But at least they have a major leaguer with potential in center field. Takes them, I would think, out of the mix for Bellinger. Bellinger, so they're not going to spend that money there, which makes me think they're going to spend the money in the starting rotation, which I think they need more. So I love this move. It's a move you mentioned, Eamon, been rumored for a while, dating back to last year trade deadline. JJ, the Mets finally have at least a big league center fielder.
It's filling a need. There's no question about it. Now, a couple of years ago, if you would have told me that Luis Robert was going to be a New York Met, you'd be like jumping for joy. This guy's an all-star player. He had 35-plus home runs for the Chicago White Sox. But outside of that 2023 season, he's never lived up to the potential, whether it's offensive struggles. You mentioned the idea of striking out too much. Durability also a concern, too. This is a guy who I want to play more baseball, but you mentioned the idea the Mets needed to go and get themselves an outfielder. Pitching needed to be their priority. It's the reason why they choked and yucked up a playoff spot a year ago. Now they have their center fielder. There's not nearly the same sense of urgency for Cody Bellinger, and they can go attack the task at hand, which is improving this pitching staff.
You know, you mentioned a couple of years ago if they acquired Robert to be a huge deal. About 18 months, 24 months ago, if they traded Acuna after acquiring him with so much fanfare, you'd say, no way, I'm not giving him up. But obviously, this was a move they needed to make in the outfield. So, Sal, you mentioned pitching. At this point, is that Framber Valdez or bust?
No, I think it's still Peralta. I mean, maybe they get ball. Who knows what the Mets...
You mentioned money. I thought you were talking free agency.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about that before with Bellinger, right? If the Mets are going to go get Bellinger, to me, that would be wasting that resource. I'd rather have gone the route of trading for Luis Robert and then investing the money in the starting rotation. I mean, look, man, who knows? Maybe Schoolbull becomes available, and then that's a piece that the Mets bring, whether it's now or, obviously at the end of the year. I wouldn't have committed any more money, even if it were with opt-outs, to an outfielder when you could find guys like Robert on the cheap with potential upside. And now, I mean, it's the one big thing. The Mets need an outfield bat. Check. It's Luis Robert. Now they need to focus on the starting rotation. So whether it's Valdez via free agency, whether it's Peralta a trade, whether it's a bigger thing with Schoolbull, that's where the focus to me should be for David Stearns and the Mets.
I want to see this team go and get themselves two bona fide starting pitchers. And you'd have to assume if you're in on Freddie Peralta, either Jonah Tong or Brandon Sproat, or both for that matter, could be wearing a Milwaukee Brewers uniform. But I can't be in a situation this year where the Mets are relying on three youngsters within their rotation. Peralta makes too much sense because of the David Stearns connection. And Zach Gallen a couple of years ago was an absolute beast. I know in his free agency year, he didn't wow anybody. The strikeout numbers are good. This is an all-star caliber pitcher. The Mets all of a sudden go and get Freddie Peralta and Zach Gallen. That rotation has a lot more firepower and a lot more legitimacy.